Okay, hey everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at the RG podcast. This is Isaiah Diesel. Unfortunately, my partner in crime is out today, but that's all the better because it'll give me a lot more time to dive into this topic. And I'm joined with a very special guest, Alone. Alone?
Alon.
Al- Al- God. Okay,
Alon.
let's
Look, it doesn't read in
Alone.
English. It reads in
Uh,
Hebrew. It doesn't read in
okay, great.
English, but it reads in Hebrew.
Milwicki.
Yup.
I got that one right.
Oh yeah, dude. That's the easy
Okay,
one.
Milwicki. Alon Milwicki. Okay, and before we get started, can you tell me where you're calling out of?
Yeah, I'm calling out of Dallas, Texas.
Dallas. Salad backwards, right?
Yes,
Um, all right.
absolutely.
I don't
Which no
hear
one
the
eats here.
twang.
It's not chicken fried, so no one eats that here.
I don't hear the twang in your voice. So I assume you're not a
No, God
native
no.
there.
No, God no. I grew up. I actually was born in South Africa, and my family emigrated to America when I was about one, and I grew up in New Jersey.
Jersey, but ethnically you are Jewish.
Um, Religiously, yeah. I'm not what you would call observant. No, my family my is let's see. On my father's side, it's Poland and Russia. On my mother's side, it's South Africa and um, Lithuania.
I was gonna say Milwaukee sounds
It's Polish.
either either Polish. I was gonna say either Polish or maybe Japanese because
Nah,
they
it's
have like
Polish.
the eyes at the end.
Yeah.
All right. So that being said, okay, that's it. Okay. You kind of already answered this one. Okay. Well, let's start here. On a scale of 1 through 7, one being you know that God exists, and 7 being you know that God doesn't exist, where would you rate on that scale?
I probably wouldn't even rate. I honestly don't care.
You're
Me and God had a parting of the ways when I was a kid, and to me, if God exists, awesome. If He doesn't, don't care.
awesome,
It's not a
and
thing. Doesn't really. I think
that's
religion is a fascinating thing to study,
yeah.
which is part of what I do.
And
But
do
I'm
this
I'm
pod,
too apathetic to even be considered
yeah.
agnostic.
So recently, this in the last episode, which is actually premiering right now, but the guy said that there's this word is called an apatheist. So that's pretty clever. Take apathy and theist, mix it
Mhm.
together. But okay, that being said, we do want to start off first with a friendly fire round because this topic specifically is going to be dealing with white supremacy, racism, and that's a pretty touchy topic.
Sure.
So we would like to start off first and foremost with a friendly fire round. And so I'm going to ask you some very easy questions,
Cool.
and you answer them as quickly as possible. Okay.
All right, you
All
got
right.
it.
Favorite top three favorite books of all time.
Uh, I would say Religion and the Racist Right. It's a book that I've most of my research is based off of.
I was going to
Uh,
say nothing you've written. That's
Oh
kind of
no, no,
cheating.
God, no! It's nothing I've written. No, no, it's just like a book
Joke.
that
That's
was
a joke. That's a
foundational to
joke.
my research. I would say Percy Jackson, The Last Olympian, big favorite of that one, and favorite book. Trying to think of one of the books I read with my kids because they would love that. There's a book about
Okay.
Greek mythology that I read to my kids that
Okay.
they like.
I see. And speaking about kids, if you're married, I assume.
Hmm.
So let's assume you weren't married and you're going to get married, and you had to have a fictional cartoon character be your best man. I know this is a stretch, but who would that be?
Superman,
Superman. Okay.
done. I was a huge Superman fan growing up.
Actually, actually, so was I. Literally to the point where I would always wear a Superman cape around. So,
Oh,
okay.
one of our wedding pictures is at as when we're walking out, like after the ceremony and everything's over. My wife got me a Superman shirt to wear.
Okay.
So I'm like literally
That's
wearing a
awesome.
Superman shirt at my wedding.
That's awesome. So, if you had to spend the last month of your life in any country, not
Greece,
America, Greece? Oh, okay. I spent about 4 months down there.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been there for a combined total of about 5 weeks over three
wow.
trips. Um, if I didn't study white supremacy, I was going to end up studying ancient Greece. I've been in
Yeah,
love with Greek mythology since I was a kid.
you know what? Then we're gonna definitely have to talk about the Golden Dawn
Yeah,
because
I know very little about them, but
yeah.
I know who they are. Yeah,
Well, there's an interesting point that I do want to discuss to you about
cool,
that, but we'll wait till we'll wait to that part.
sure.
And so here we go. So if you could be any animal, what animal would that be and why?
I've always liked zebras. I don't know why.
Zebras?
Just zebras. I've always liked zebras. And now,
Okay.
since my kids have been watching The Lion Guard, and they all scream panic and run all the time for like a good year, my daughters were running around going panic and run, panic and
Mhm.
run.
All
So,
right. And here we go. Last question, my favorite question, actually. If you were going to get killed by any fictional horror character, who would you want to die at the hands of?
uh,
This is the important one.
uh, probably the Joker because I die with a smile on my face.
Okay. All right. So here's how this part's going to go. I want you to give me a 2 minute summation of your life and what you're doing.
Okay.
And then we're going to dig into, we're going to unpack that. So don't go on for like 5 or 10 minutes. Just
No, you
give me a
got it,
really
man.
rundown version and then we'll get in the meat and taters, right? Here
You
you
got it,
go.
man.
You're on.
All right. So in 2009, I left my career in television to start researching white supremacy
Hmm.
with the express purpose of working for the federal government and tracking and understanding how these guys function. And during my master's degree at Seton Hall University, I decided I wanted to go on to my doctorate, continuing to study white supremacy with specific focus on what's considered neo-Nazism today. I call it Americanized Nazism. We can get into that later. And in 2013, I got trained and cleared by the Air Force and began contract work as an intelligence analyst for them for about 2 years. And in 2015, I started teaching history, and I decided at that point that I actually wanted to be an educator and wanted to be a full-blown academic, and discontinued my contract work. And in 2019, I got my doctorate from American University, uh, successfully defending my dissertation. It was called Baptizing Nazism, an analysis.
Baptizing.
Yeah, and then as my master's degree advisor came up with that title. And I have been studying the religious racist right with specific focus on Wesley Swift, who I would argue is one of the chief progenitors of modern American theological Nazism. Um, and there are adherents to his way of thinking, uh, and there are parts of his teachings that still infiltrate American society today, unfortunately, and has become more prevalent in the last couple of years for sure.
Did you say Wesley Swift?
Yeah,
Okay.
he's sort of a guy who's been lost to history, except to people who study this stuff. But most
Okay.
people have heard of the Aryan Nations, right? Richard Gerndt Butler.
Yes.
Wesley Butler was basically trained by Swift, and
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of other connections and stuff. Like this dude was the linchpin of American Nazism for about 20 years.
Okay. So first and foremost, are your parents either observant or like culturally Jewish?
Yeah, more so
Okay.
than me. I was
Okay.
it was I was no I wasn't raised in a very religious household. We just, major holidays. I went to a
Yeah.
Jewish day school growing up.
Y-
But my own
Yeah.
personal experiences sort of deviated me from
Yeah.
all that.
I'm just trying to understand your background here because I went into Jerusalem and I went and practiced Hanukkah and Shabbat inside of a family's household there. And the son was telling me that he was an atheist, but whenever the Shabbat time was around, he was like the one reading the prayers and stuff. And I was like, after I didn't tell him immediately, but I was like why, like if you're an atheist, like why would you be interested in this, whatever? And so I definitely learned that a lot of people there are culturally Jewish, but maybe might be an atheist or agnostic or
Well,
whatever. So
we do it for family. Like whatever we observe with my family or my extended family here, we do it for family.
okay, all right, but that's interesting. Just knowing that as a background. So, all right, so here's where we want to start. First, so many different ways I could take this right now. So, oh, you know what? Why don't we just start off at Greece? Um,
Hmm.
because I spent about 4 months there, and it's actually whenever right before I went over to Israel. So my girlfriend was living there, and but one of the things I saw there that was fascinating because Greece is supposedly like the birthplace of a democracy,
Hmm.
and I saw it's really fascinating. I went to this like a key shop. I needed to buy a key, and this guy straight up had a communist sickle and sickle and
Hammer and sickle.
hammer and sickle, and and then also while I was there, I learned that there is a Golden Dawn Party, which is
Mhm.
the equivalent of the Nazi Party, and so in
Well,
one sense,
I mean, it's a
go ahead.
wannabe Nazi. It's a wannabe Nazi party. I don't think we'll ever have anything that was equivalent to the Nazi party. Speaking as a historian, but
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt. Yeah, you
Well,
would
it's an
take
ultra.
it's a fascist party.
Okay, it's a fascist party, and so what's the reason why I'm mentioning this? Because save save the violence, except for that or anything that's like belligerent. I actually do believe that there's a really there's a place for people who are on the extreme lefts and are on the extreme rights, and so having like a two-party system, it's hard to fit people into those kind of boxes, into one or two. So what I would like to see uh, in America, not only just America, but in other places, which exist in a lot of other places, is that you have four or five different parties that
Mhm.
are viable, and some places like they have to work for alliances and whatnot. But do you think that there is some kind of place for like a Golden Dawn party in America system?
Well, they've tried. They've
Uh huh.
tried. There was like in the 1930s, there was the America First Party,
Hmm.
and they've tried with the Tea Party,
Tea
but
party.
this country is so, or even libertarians, this country is so set on the two party system
Hmm.
that that you do have to sort of fill into that one box. I don't think there is. It's almost like those two parties are so big that there's no room for anything else, and anything else
Right.
is always edged out um, by the larger noise of the parties. Would it be beneficial for this country to have multiple parties? I mean, from a social level, yeah. From a political level, I think it would be a complete and total, you know, breakdown. I think that would be one of those things where like the American system would have to, and some argue this might be necessary. The American system needs to break down and rebuild, right?
Right.
Because a lot of people
Right.
argue that our political system is so broken right now that it's so, I would argue that especially since 9/11, this country has become so polarized that it's that if you're not with us, you're against us. And that
Yeah.
even if you're, like the idea of being like, um, what, like fiscally conservative and socially liberal,
Right. Right.
you're a traitor to both parties.
Right. Like actually, Arnold Schwarzenegger, just so you know, he was
Yeah.
our governor in California, and that's exactly his policy. And so, yeah, you might have people who are mixes. It's like just because you're,
I think most people are, but they're not very loud. The
right,
loudest people are always on the extremes. And a lot of
right,
times we have to cater to those extremes, unfortunately, you
right.
know.
So, yeah, so I am kind of like I kind of believe that as long as you're not out physically attacking people or engaging in kind of hate speech, if you have these views about white supremacy or superiority, it's like that isn't really, it's like you're free. If you guys want to get together and burn some stuff or shoot some guns, I don't really care. Like that doesn't really bother me at all. I don't believe in white supremacy, but if that's something that you want to believe in, I'm like, well, it's a free world. You have that
Well,
right to hold on to whatever views you have.
well, that's sort of like the blessing and the curse of America, right?
Hmm.
Because yeah, you do you. At the same time, the fact that that's still around is emblematic, I think, of the systemic racism in this country. That
Sure,
to
sure,
be, uh, you know, essentially like a white Protestant male is advantageous in this country,
sure.
right? And the fact that we are only just beginning to reckon with it is both good and also pathetic, right? Because it's been something that's been visible for a long time,
Yeah,
um, and what we're seeing now is the pushback against that. That's what this whole um, critical race theory is. Critical race theory is just a boogeyman for people to be afraid of when it's really an upper level graduate course that is never ever going to be even remotely touched on before you're at graduate school for, I think, law, if even any social science. And it's just about uh, maintaining that hegemony, and that's sort of what we're seeing right now. Is you know people are starting to push back at that hegemony.
okay, so all right, so I think I know where I'm going to take this next, but all right, so let me ask you then real quick, can you just give like a 1 minute synopsis on your dissertation?
My dissertation was basically studying this man Wesley Swift, who I argue is the chief progenitor of American, I guess what we would call neo-Nazism, what I call American Nazism, theological American Nazism, uh, how and why he was successful, and where his ideas came from and his legacy.
Okay, so the neo-Nazi, okay, the neo-Nazis, do they differ quite a bit from like a skinheads or KKK
Well, here's
associate
here's the thing: if we take white supremacy as a broad, overarching category,
umbrella?
yeah, I break it down into three separate categories. We have American Nazis, which I call, we have white nationalists, okay, um, and then we have like sort of, I guess you could call them like white separatist, white privileged,
White separatists.
sort of. Those are the I'm not racist but people. That that's another category. But the guys I study um, are typically referred to as neo Nazis. I think I've come to in my research has shown me that the term neo is, which means new, is a sort of a fallacy, because nothing about those guys is new. In fact, it's more of a continuum. There's a direct continuum you can draw between the guys in the post World War II era. You can draw a direct continuum to the 1920s and 30s. They're just Nazis in America. There's nothing new
That's
about them.
that
Uh,
sounds like quite a bit of a stretch though, because I haven't heard any of these guys calling for genocide. Or
oh, they
they
do.
might they
Oh, they
do.
do. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well you're
Oh,
probably
there's in terms of the Holocaust, there's two different camps among these guys. There's the Holohoaxers, the ones who think it was fake, and the ones who call from 6 million more. If you remember in the January 6th riot, there were people wearing patches that said 6MWE. That meant 6 million wasn't enough. There were people who
six
stormed the
men.
Capitol
Yeah,
wearing that. So there are definitely
that
people. There is definitely people within this country who believe that Hitler's work was incomplete and it needs to be. Will
that
they ever act on it? That's another story. They don't have that kind of power, but
but
oh boy, do they believe it.
that is the definition of irony, because on one hand they simultaneously say it didn't happen, but on the other hand
Two
they
different
also
camps. Two different
yeah,
camps.
but
Yeah.
then there's also saying, well, we want to see 6 million more. And I will say this: any chance you ever saw the movie the Believer with Ryan Gosling? He plays a Jewish Nazi.
Yeah, I saw a
I,
preview for it. I never actually saw it.
I believe it's based on a true story too. But anyway, he has to go to. He gets into him and his neo-Nazi friends. They get into a fight with some black people, and then they have to do. They have to do like you know when they do the not the Holocaust survivor, whatever it is that they do with them,
This the speaking
like a,
tours. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So they have to sit down and talk to a survivor, and she's telling them their story, her story. So it's like you can really deny this, whenever she's telling you what happened in her life. But one of the guys says, he says, because one of the guys starts denying that it happened, and then he's like, well, hey, if it didn't happen, why are we such supporters of Adolf Hitler? And so he's making a joke out of it, but that's a that's a bit of a it's out there because it's very few things are as documented as the Holocaust.
Well,
So
but here's the thing. Here's the thing to keep in
okay.
mind here, right?
Hmm.
Holocaust denial begins almost immediately afterwards. I believe some of the most fervent Holocaust denial actually starts in France, and it crosses over to the U.S. in the mid '50s, and you start seeing the term Holocaust crop up here,
I've
and
never heard that.
it's a very unfortunate common phrase in the '50s. Because there's in the 1950s, there's a lot of Jewish people who are emigrating to America because of the Holocaust.
Hmm.
And for example, Wesley Swift, the guy I study, will tell you that all of the photos were doctored. They were, illegitimate, and that even and his predecessor, the founder of the America First Party, Gerald L.K. Smith, will tell you that they were all smuggled into Manhattan, and that's why there's such a large Jewish population in New York City. And they have all these um, documented evidence that they can't show you because the government is controlled by Jews. It's that whole shadow government. It's that whole deep state thing that's very coded language for anti-Semitism. Uh, something Hitler was big on, this shadow government that was the Jewish people, and this is as old as, I mean, you go
Right.
back to, Hitler wrote about it in Mein Kampf. Henry Ford wrote about it in International Jew. It was written about in the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, that there's this Jewish shadow world that
Yeah.
controls everything. So if the Jews control everything, including media, then it's not that far. If you can believe that, then it's not that far stretched to believe that they manipulated the world into believing that this tragedy happened.
Right. And so for the record, so I will tell you this. So growing up, my mom showed us. She took us to go see Schindler's List when it came out,
Mhm.
and I would not recommend any child seeing that movie because it scared the living Jesus out of me. But I guess she wanted me to be aware of this, this reality, and she would also tell me that the Germans, there was like something genetically like wrong with them that made them more likely to do something like some horrific killing like that. And I wasn't young enough to understand that genocide is something that it is unfortunately common in mankind. So there
Yeah.
wasn't really anything unique that Adolf
Oh,
Hitler was doing here. I mean,
and
genocide start. I mean, I live in South Korea
no,
where
no,
this.
that's a fair statement.
I
Um,
live in South Korea where these concentration camps are going on as we speak right now,
right.
and literally around 2 million people have died under this the Kim regime. So, but I wish I would have known that back then to say, hey, this is not to think that any one race could do this or is
Well,
more genetically inclined to that is totally wrong.
it's completely it. Look, like we're like genetically, we're like 98% identical to each other, right? There is something in that whole unoriginality of Hitler, right? Uh,
Hmm.
Hitler,
Sure. Yeah.
The Nazis never had an original idea. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that within the study of history. As far as I'm concerned, there are two universal truths. There are two non-debatable facts. One, the Civil War is about slavery, cut and print, and two, Hitler never had any original ideas.
Hmm.
To be fair, all right, the gas chambers was something new. However, had the gas chambers been the technology been available, I have no doubt Stalin would have used it in the 1930s on his own people.
Sure. Sure.
Genocide is an unfortunate fact of history.
Mm.
What makes the Holocaust the capital G genocide is not just the sheer number of people that were killed in such a short time. We're talking about 6 million Jews and like 3 to 5 million others. So we're talking about like 10 million people who were killed, right, in what, like 4 years, 5 years. But also, the what makes it, again, the capital G genocide is the sort of either blind eye the rest of the world turn toward it, the casual indifference, or the active participation, and then the fervent denial of it or the extortion of it afterwards. That's what makes it the uh, most horrific thing. The Holocaust, to me, is the most horrific thing mankind did to each other, not simply because of just the genocide, but also the brutality that existed, the horrors of life in the camps, the torture, the rape, the family. Just it's just it's one of those things where, like, if you scratch the surface of the Holocaust, like say watching Schindler's List, you
Hmm.
see how horrible it was.
Yeah.
But if you're someone, who studies this stuff, and like myself, and you dig a little deeper, you realize that this stuff was just horrific. I mean,
Uh,
there's and all you need to do is listen to a survivor talk,
sure.
and that's something that I mean, unfortunately, that generation is almost gone,
Yeah.
and it,
Yeah.
it loses something, I think, when you watch it online or hear it secondhand.
Right.
So
But
if there's anything I could tell anybody, is if you have the opportunity to listen to a survivor, go, because you will truly start to understand what made this into such a horrific thing, you
so
know
if you study the because I am have a not nearly as much education as you in the history field, but I do have a degree in it, and I will say that living in South Korea and studying about Japan, I mean, Japan killed more people than the Germans did, and they kidnapped hundreds of thousands of women from South Korea and the Philippines, and so these kind of things, I believe. I'm not. I don't want to misquote that. I believe they also did the Bataan Death March.
yep,
I'm
yep.
not sure if that's Japan right now. I might.
No, that was Japan.
Oh, yeah. So they did a lot of the very similar things, but I have to this date I have only seen one movie about the rape of Nanjing
Hmm.
and China, and so for me, if I'm being objective here, um, this might get something down to you can understand why people are talking about why they think Jews run Hollywood or whatever, because there's literally every year there's several movies and several documentaries that continually get released on the Holocaust, where you don't actually, as of recently, I will say that the Armenian genocide did get one with Christian Bale. So
Hmm.
I don't. This is not in any sense of the way in the word to like diminish the importance of talking about genocide, the Holocaust,
Well,
but
it's
it's like,
because it's because I think what came out of it.
please
It's
elaborate.
because, yeah, it's because I would argue it's because a lot of people, uh, survivors, started talking. I mean, you also have entire fields of like social psychology that grew out of studies of the Holocaust postmortem, because it wasn't just about, like, again, it wasn't just about the killing. It was about the the casual and active participation of quote unquote ordinary men. There's a book by a historian, Jan Gross, called Neighbors, where he talks about this small town in Poland called Jedwabne, where for like centuries Jews and non-Jews lived side by side, you know,
Mm-hmm.
making up almost half the town, perfectly no big deal, and they were all very much against the Soviets at first, and then the Nazis roll in. They see the Soviet Union. They're like, hooray, the Soviets are kicked out. The Nazis roll in. They're there for a couple days. And then after the Nazis leave, 2 days later, all of those non-Jews just rounded up and killed all of the Jews living there in the most horrific ways. That's why it's called Neighbors. They killed their neighbors. And it's
Mm-hmm.
why. It's because this sort of, I mean, again, I'm not a social psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist, but, I've been lucky enough to, like, I co-taught a history and social psychology of the Holocaust class for a couple of years at Dallas College, and you know, my co-teacher and mentor, Professor Melissa Weston, she studies psychopathy and sociopathy and all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and it was almost like this green light was lit among people just go nuts and just kill. That these base instincts just came out in people, and I think the part of the reason why we see the sort of, I guess, um, movieing or movifying of the Holocaust is because in the 50s and the 60s, or really in the 60s, there is a lot of concerted scholarly effort and real interest in America in studying and looking at the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So there's sort of an Americanization of the Holocaust. And with an
Yeah.
Americanization of anything comes movies.
Yeah. So
I think that
I don't want to get I don't want to have this whole conversation on the Holocaust. So I do want to transition over to the American Nazi and white nationalists. Um,
sure.
would you say from your research? I asked Mr. Scoop about this topic, and he said it was something breakdown wise, like maybe 40 to 45% of their movement was Christian. About 40 to 45% was were like pagan Odinists, and then there was like 10% who were the creators, the atheist
Yeah. Yeah. He and
group.
I have talked about that too.
Yeah, can you tell me if that is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah.
If there
That,
is if there is are the Christians? I would have thought that the Christians would have a much higher role in that, but can you tell me
well,
how that breaks?
The Nazis were fundamentally a-religious, right? Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one Germany, one Hitler. There was nothing above the state, and so to worship a god to Nazis was something that was no. There were members of the Nazi Party, Alfred Rosenberg, most notably, who were very interested in paganism and
Hmm.
even went for an expedition to find Atlantis, which was like supposedly like the Aryan ancestral homeland, and the reason why it was sank was because of the Jews. Because why not? You know, and
Oh my God!
that leads to a lot of the paganism. A lot of people who
Right,
supported
right.
Nazism did so as, you know, good God-fearing Christians. There was a movement called the Deutsche Christian movement, the German Christian movement, that other historians have written, really great books about. That was about sort of um, Nazifying Christianity. Making
Yeah.
Jesus Aryan, even though like he had been depicted as sort of Aryan from
Uh huh.
millennia or centuries, I guess, at that point. Um, the so that is the long historian answer to say yes, I agree with Mr. Scoop on that. I think that he and I have also talked about the types of people who would come to the Aryan nations, and the Aryan nations was a church foremost, and that it was devoted to Christian identity, which was Wesley Swift's. He didn't found it, but he's the one who sort of made it into what it
Yeah.
was. And so, yeah, like that breakdown sounds
So
about right, and that's why it's again, it's a very much more of an American Nazism. It's nothing
yeah.
good.
No, please, please.
No, it's like it's nothing particularly new. It's and he even told me that when people would call them neo Nazis, that they would laugh because they just saw themselves as Nazis. But you look at American Nazism, and I think it needs to be broken down into two camps: those who are ideological and those who are theological. Those who support and believe in Hitler based on religious beliefs, or incorporate Nazism and Hitler into uh, a Christian fundamentalism, or a Satcher or Odinism. And then there's those other people who are just Nazis. The only difference between them and the people in the Third Reich is that Hitler's dead. Nazism has been debunked as a a viable socio-political platform. They're in America, and they don't have any shape or form of power or platform comparable to the 1930s.
Yeah.
They're just American Nazis. You know, um, they're a bunch of they're basically like wannabes. They're basically like cosplayers.
So, cosplay. So, this is an interesting phenomena to see the people simultaneously waving Nazi flags with the American flags.
Yeah,
Like that couldn't possibly be. If you told me to think of something more ironic than that, I would have a hard
well,
time to do it because
there was a Nazi rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden where there's a picture
yeah,
of George Washington with a swastika on his head.
yeah, it would be the definition of irony, and I thought this was really fascinating because Jeff Scoop, his ancestry was in the Third Reich. I think his grandfather and grand uncle, uh, great uncle, great whatever that's called. They fought in the Third Reich in the war, and so that kind of built up this fascination with him. But you bring that over here to America, and there's very few things I think there can be quite as ironic as that they're representing both of those. Like if you're gonna hold those views, but you're also holding on to something that is just totally in an opposite of the other thing. So I will give you this example. I am a Christian myself, but as a as a Christian, I also was very troubled for the last maybe 5 or 6 years because it seems like the white, what you'd call white national, that's a weird expression to say, but a white nationalist, the white nationalists seem to be a lot more emboldened under the last administration, and they were simultaneously saying that um, one like we're Christians, and two we're also like nationalists in this thing as well.
Christian
And
nationalism, yeah.
yeah, so those things are a bit contradictory though, because if you're actually going by the Bible and not what your just opinion is or what you want to see done, like we're not called to be citizens of the earth, so our citizenship is in heaven. So in fact, I would say absolutely this would be considered a form of idolatry if you're just going by the Bible. Now, if you don't believe in the Bible, then that's irrelevant to you. But if you do believe in that, then you're holding on to something that's like you know what I mean. You're trying to hold on to three
Right.
different things, and you only have two hands. So
Well,
which one of these has got to go?
well, that sort of presupposes that there's one scriptural interpretation, and that's sort of again like the blessing and the curse of theology or religion is that there is no singular interpretation of scripture that is correct, right? Um, it's interpretive, right? Theology at its core is founded on belief. You can't disprove religion. You can't just disprove faith. There's no way to do it. So if you interpret the scripture or a passage that says, like love thy neighbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. That great. Someone who would be, a white supremacist or American Nazi or a white nationalist will have a very big focus on their neighbor, right? They won't see a Jew as their neighbor. They won't see a black person as their neighbor. They won't see an Islamic person as their neighbor. Their neighbor will be their fellow white nationalist, their fellow American Nazi. So when they say love thy neighbor, they're really just saying love your own interpretation of that. And the problem is you can't go ahead and say, no, well, the scripture meant this because you can't prove or disprove that. There's no,
Well,
so like there's different interpretations. That's why we have like, what's called, there's a book called The Democratization of Christianity that talks about, the breakup of Protestantism, why there's so many different sects of Protestantism, right? They're all looking at the same book. They just have a slightly different interpretation of, or a slightly different following, or slightly,
so
So, again, that's the
That
blessing and the curse of religion, is you can't actually say somebody, this is what this means, this is what this is about, and this is what you
yeah,
should believe, because
that
you can't support that.
that's an interesting way to phrase that. But I would say it would take a lot of
Oh, it's a lot of finagling.
no,
It's a lot of
yeah,
movement.
it would take a lot of finagling, whatever, to get to a Jew or a Muslim isn't my neighbor. And I will say this because Jesus was asked this question. He was asked, well, who is my neighbor? And this is actually the context of the Good Samaritan parable. And I will say this: the Good Samaritan parable is the only time Jesus actually gave a location to where this thing was going on, because he's always like, oh yeah, there's this city and there was a guy in the city and he had like a fish or whatever. He would just give some kind of general statement, but where he talked about was actually Jericho. And I do want to say this: I actually went down into Jericho and stayed at a mosque there for about a week, and um, I found these people to be some of the kindest and most gentle, loving people I've ever met in my life. And I do want to tell you this quick funny story, because as I was getting ready to leave, these Muslim guys like invited me over to smoke something that was very similar to weed. It wasn't weed, but I don't know what it was. But so as I'm there and I'm having this meal with them, I saw from the corner of my eye some dude pick up an axe. Okay, and I'm thinking in my mind, oh my God, my life is about to end in 2 minutes. I'm just start praying. I'm like, God, like receive my spirit kindly. And he walks over right behind me and just starts chopping some wood right behind me. And I'm like, oh my God, that was a close call. But that kind of racism, I've had to confront a lot of that, like racism that I have as a Mexican living in South Korea. I've definitely come to understand that the various Asian groups, people tend to think like Asians are all they look alike,
No,
they all
there's a
have the
lot
same
of
culture.
intra
Yeah.
racism in every group. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's something I've seen very, very much firsthand. And there's a lot of beef too. Like,
Oh yeah.
just think about this. In fact, Jeff Scoop, I sent over Jeff Scoop I sent him over a it's called Dodok, which is like an island that Japan is saying belongs to them. There's some of these. Japan has some islands that are in dispute with Russia as well, Russia and with Japan and Korea. So I sent him over this thing for him to keep that in mind about the kind of work I'm doing as far as peace building and bridge building. But these the issues that are with Japan and China. This stuff specifically with China, it's like thousands of years, but Japan is more recent. The last few hundred years, they've been colonized and they've been abused very badly. And just for me, it's like I don't think the Holly not that the Holocaust isn't important, but like have you ever heard of any of the have you ever seen a movie or documentary on the comfort woman here in South Korea? Are you familiar with that?
No.
Yeah. So literally hundreds of thousands of women were kidnapped from South Korea and the Philippines and forced to be sex workers to the Japanese men. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
a lot of them were killed and viciously raped. Some of them were like 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
It's just a really horrific thing that Japan has they've kind of danced around whether or not they did it or not. They're kind of like, oh yeah, well, you know what I mean? They play some really stupid games, and obviously doing things like continually claiming that Dokdo is their island just shows that they're genuinely not at all repentant about or sorry for what they did
There's
to these people.
there's
You know.
there's a consistent theme. I mean, look, genocide is a fact of history.
Hmm.
It's a consistent. I mean, what you described could easily be replaced with uh,
Indians.
how American talks
Hmm.
treated Native Americans.
Hmm.
I mean, just you know, one of the questions I ask my students is, how do you characterize westward expansion? And is it imperialism? Is it manifest destiny? Is it conquest? Is it genocide? Is it
Hmm.
cultural genocide? And the
All
thing
the
is,
above.
when we think of genocide, we go to think of the Holocaust. And I think, like I said, rightfully so. But at the same time, genocide, it doesn't necessarily have a time limit.
Hmm.
You know, whether it takes 4 years or 200 years, it still is what it is. Um, but I want to circle back to when you were talking about racism a little bit, and there is sort of since that is something of a focus of my study and something I'm supposedly like an expert on. Um, I have horrible imposter syndrome, but but one of the in my research, I sort of came up with this sort of definition of racism that I think is sort of applicable. Um, and no, I've gotten some good feedback from it from
Hmm.
colleagues. So um, it's when you racism is all about othering. When you other somebody, when you say because you are X, Y, and Z is true, based on little to no information, right? Based mostly on emotion, right? Based on little to no information, emotion, or maybe personal experience. When you say because you are X, Y, and Z is true, that's racism. All right. Because what you as a
Oh,
well, think about it, because what you in effect are doing is you are racializing the other group. You are saying because of this characteristic, because you are Asian, because you are Korean, because you are white, because you are black, because you are Jewish, because you are gay, you are saying this is how you and your group operate. This is what you're all about. You are essentially turning that other group into a race of people, and that's
you,
being racist. You see what I'm
okay.
saying? Because
Yeah, but I,
you are assigning them characteristics and saying because you are Jewish, uh, you're greedy. Because you are, you know, I don't know, Muslim, you're a terrorist. Because
right,
you're
right,
gay, you want to molest kids. Because you
right,
are
right,
a black, you're basically saying
right.
you as the individual, the person doing that, are racializing that other. And racism
Okay,
is omnidirectional. It
okay.
doesn't
So
matter which direction it's
yeah,
going in.
okay. So I agree more with that last part that you said, but um, this is a bit of a problem here because I, we're doing this podcast. I normally have an atheist co-host, and we interview Jews, Muslims. In fact, we had a really interesting talk with a Jew and a Muslim at the same time, and people said it was like one of the most respectful interfaith talks that they've ever seen. So that was very,
That's awesome.
I was very happy to participate in that, to arrange that. But I mean, that being said, properly defining things, I think, is just so key and so crucial
Totally.
and I'll tell you the reason why this is, and it's not just for semantics because let's say I say racism needs to be taken very, very, very seriously. Okay,
I
it
agree.
does. It needs to be taken seriously. But whenever you start calling things racist that aren't
Well,
racist, for example,
here's
hold on, let me finish. Let me finish. For example, if I were to say Japanese people like to Hondas, for example, they like driving Hondas. Okay, and so they sometimes refer to those cars as rice rockets, and people will or rice burners, and they'll say that's a racist term, but implying that Japanese people eat rice a lot. The thing is, though, man, I can tell you this: if you were to make that stereotype about people from South Korea, Koreans eat rice at every single meal, like not just once a day, not just twice a day. They will eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then maybe another one or two ways, like they might eat as like a dessert or something. So to say that Asians have what you might call, there's a scientific term for it, which is called an epicanthic fold, which is the result of them having much less defined eyebrows. Their faces are a lot flatter than
well,
Westerners. But if you just point these out, that's also considered racist. So for me, I would say racism, if you just go by the definition, is that it is making one group either less or more than the other one
it, it
in lieu of nothing else other than their race. So
it doesn't
I,
have
I
to be.
go ahead,
That's the
please.
thing. It doesn't have to
I'll
be.
get your feedback.
There's there's two things. One is called casual racism, which is usually the result of systemic, right? Things like that we don't necessarily think are racist or sound
Hmm.
racist, and they may be true, but the fact is when you're characterizing a people based on that truth, yeah, that's being racist. When you're saying that this is what all of them do and in perpetuity, that's uh that's casting your personal observation on a whole group of people, right? uh when we talk about positive racism, that's something that's also when you're saying like, like all Asians are good at math, or like you assign these positive traits, or you start saying
Hmm.
things like, you know, or Jewish people are all good at at
Finances.
finance, or black people are always good athletes,
Yeah.
and like these are good attributes, so they sound like they're being complimentary, but it's
Yeah.
still racism because you are in effect assigning based on your own personal experience or your own emotional understanding. And the thing about defining racism, right? Because what
Hmm.
I was trying to do was not define racism. It was explaining how racism operates, right? Because the problem with defining racism is we fall into what's called social constructs, right?
Hmm.
And race is a social construct. Like I said earlier, we
Yeah.
are, you and me, no matter where we come from, if we break ourselves down on a biological and genetic level, we're like 98%. But for a few phenotypes, we're identical,
Right. 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 Right.
right? So racially, there's that's nothing, right? So
Right.
race is a socially constructed term that is used to help understand and recognize difference
Hmm.
on the one level, but on the other level, it's also something that's visible and we see every day, and it has real
Right. Right.
or implications, which is why race is one of the more difficult constructs to talk about. When we talk about things like freedom, right? Freedom is a social construct, right? The dictionary definition is like the state of being free, but freedom means like you've lived and been in multiple different places. You can't tell me that freedom isn't different for different peoples. Like what they mean by freedom isn't different for different peoples.
Oh yeah. There's lots of
It's totally
censorship
different.
here in
A
Korea.
social
There's a lot of
construct,
censorship.
yeah, a social construct is a word or a phrase, right, that has no finite definition, right? It depends on who's doing the defining, when it's being defined, the context into which it's being defined, and often enough who it's being defined for, right? So when you have
Right.
a word like race that is a social construct and an ism, a belief that is built on that, it is inherently problematic because if it's a belief that's built on something that is infinitely redefinable, infinitely reinterpreted, right? It's going to be abused,
Right.
right? And that's why I think this explanation of racism works because it's more about the individual, right? It's more about like if I'm saying, "Oh, well, you're in South Korea, so all you people do there is eat rice,"
Oh
right?
yeah.
And that might be true, but
Yeah.
it's
It is
it's
true.
not about the fact that yeah, you eat a lot of rice. It's about me saying all you people, all you South Korean people, all right, all you need is rice and you're fine. I'm effectively saying that South Koreans, you as a South Korean native and you living in South Korea and all South Koreans living there, right? You're synonymous with rice. I am
So
essentially racializing you. I have decided that this is who you are, right?
yeah.
It's not about the act of saying, it's not about the stereotypes or whatnot. It's about the individual racializing the other. I am fitting you into my own box. I am putting you into my own racial box. I'm saying because you're maybe I don't know, you're Latino, so
I'm Latino. Yeah.
yeah, so you're Latino, so you must go to you like to sleep, you like to nap, right? Because siesta. I heard that word, and I assume that's what all Mexican people do. Because remember, most people, especially in America, think that Mexico goes from the southern tip of the United States all the way down to Chile and includes Portugal and Spain. You tell someone you're from El Salvador, they're like, yeah, that's South Mexico, right?
Right.
But
Right.
do you see my point? It's about the individual racializing the other. It's not about whether there's a truth to the stereotype. It's not about. I mean, the reason why stereotypes work is because they're ingrained in some form of truth. And I just realized I'm saying ingrained while talking about rice, and that's a little funny.
Ingrained.
But
But it's, don't
but
worry,
you
I'll put the drum roll in there. Okay,
but you see what
so
I'm saying? It's about the individual or the group
well,
who's saying because you are X, Y, and Z is true. And then they
okay,
make inferences based on that. Because you're
yeah,
Jewish, you're seeking to undermine the government. And this is what we're getting back to
yeah,
Nazis here. You're seeking to undermine the government, or you're undermining God if you're the guys I believe in. And if you're an enemy of God, the
right,
only means you serve Satan. And it's my job as a Christian to get rid of the enemies of Satan. So I'm not actually committing
right, right.
genocide. I'm not committing murder. I'm doing God's work.
Interesting. And I do want to tell you something funny. The Jewish guy who we interviewed him I think 3 or 4 different times. I interviewed him one on one, and then with an atheist, and then with a Muslim, and then with like this other guy. I don't know what the heck he was, but yeah, we interviewed him 4 times. And I think whenever I was interviewing him by myself, he said we have this saying in Israel that like, hey, if you ever get depressed about yourself, like you don't have enough money or you don't feel like you've accomplished enough, he goes, you got to go listen to some of the right wingers, some of the Nazis, because they're always talking about how Jews have so much money and control.
Oh yeah.
He goes, it'll help you feel better about yourself. But um,
If I had an ounce of the power that anti-Semites think I have, all right, I would be. I tell this to my students all the time that I would. First of all, I'd be both communist and capitalist, so all of their tuition would be going into my right pocket, and I'd
right,
be equally sharing it with my left pocket.
right,
So,
that's great.
man,
And actually, I did tell Jeff Scoop this, that you go into Israel and a lot of the places there, you would just assume that you're just in like the ghetto and like California or something. Like there's nothing remotely. In fact, I stop and think, I'm like, why are you guys fighting over this land? This isn't like there's nothing special about, you know what I mean? It just run of the mill. It's not superly developed. And I like, for instance, you compared it to Seoul. Seoul is one of the most developed cities in the entire world. It has like 10 downtowns. And so, anyway, your average Joe Blow, your average Bernstein, or whatever is just getting by. Like they're just living their lives. They're just going about their lives, taking the bus, getting to work. And so, this idea that they're all rich
at
or
each
they're
other's
all,
throats is just
yeah,
wrong.
it's beyond ridiculous. I can tell you that from having seen it firsthand. It's people are people. Actually, I would just say that people are people. um, One of the most unifying things that I found out of anywhere I've went to is that the most people, of course there's some sociopathic people who abuse their kids, but most people, 99% of people, they want to see a better world. They want to give their kids things that they never had. So I want to do things for my child that I wasn't able to have growing up. And so I found this to be the case with people everywhere. Like people want something better for their family. And I think that says something about us as humans, about how we care about people who we love. That we want them. I don't want my daughter to inherit the same world that I inherited. It's as simple as that. This is why I do this program. This is why we we're having respectful conversations, even when we agree to disagree, and even having interfaith talks, because that's the kind of world I want to contribute to my daughter's future. Actually, I told you this beforehand. My daughter was born right in the Olympics, um, in South Korea. So it was like I was divorced with my wife for 5 years. I went back to America. I found Jesus Christ, came back to South Korea. First night, my wife got pregnant. And then my daughter was born right in the Olympics. So that was kind of an amazing time for me that was the spirit that she was born into. And that's what I want to contribute to. But I do want to ask you a question. Have you ever read the book? Um, have you ever read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell?
I don't think so. No.
Are you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with um, why South Korea had the highest plane crash rates? Korean Airlines had the highest plane crashes anywhere in the world. Have you
Mm-mm,
heard this story?
mm-mm.
So it came down to when they started to analyze the black boxes that when the South Korean, the older person was flying, it's actually more dangerous than when the co-pilot, the younger guy, was flying, because in their society, like, you're not supposed to criticize older people. It's a very like Confucianism hierarchy based culture society, and so they showed the transcripts from when the younger guy was trying to hint at, subtly hint to, hey, you're probably not doing this right, and you can literally see the guys like not even responding to the things that they're saying, because some of that is, just culture, and they had to address that. They had to address that because that could not continue to go on, because literally hundreds of people were dying as a result of that. But he also talks in there about the rice crop, and about how that maybe he presents that maybe this this contributed this contributed to Asian people, just on average. Obviously there's some Asian people who aren't good at math, but why most Asian people are a lot better than say like Westerners, and it doesn't have anything to do with like their genetics or anything. It's not at all related. There's a cultural element to it where it's like they really highly excel in things that are like standardized, to where there's not a lot of critical thinking that's going on, because in Confucius society, it's like the teachers are very high esteemed. And so if you're debating with your teachers or you're questioning the things that they're saying, that's really looked down upon and frowned. And also too, if you're going to say something, like if you were to sum up like their societies, I would put it into one sentence, is that they say the peg that stands out gets hammered down. And then as America, we would say the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So the person who's getting, who's making a stink about something is going to get the attention. And for them, they just want to blend into, they want to blend in. So that, if you understand those cultural, and he gives a few others in there, but I mean, you could understand why it doesn't have anything to do with they're good at math. It's that they're more likely. This is an area in which they're more likely to excel in, rather than doing something like research into some like he quotes in there. This is all backed up by statistics. I'd really highly suggest you take a look at this. But he was showing how very few like Nobel peace awards, no,
Nobel
uh,
Prize.
Nobel
Yeah,
prizes.
I
Yeah,
got you.
brain fart. It is like 2 a.m. here, so I might
I'm
not be
sorry, man.
100% right now. So, but he shows, like, population wise, they produce very little amount in this area, but in this particular arena, because you don't have to question things about the teacher, you don't have to raise your hand, et cetera, et cetera. It's very easy to memorize and to be standardized, and so it just makes sense. Now, that's not saying they're any more or any less than any other people. It's just this is an area, culturally speaking, that it fits in. And I just want to give you one other quick example with that, because probably 90% of all the churches in South Korea are from one denomination, and that's the Presbyterians. Okay, the Presbyterians, every other church you see here, it's just everywhere. It's pervasive. It is Presbyterian churches. Okay, so there's a few here and there that are not, but the thing is that if you understand the hierarchical structure of with the deacons and the bishops and all that stuff, it just fits really well into their society. So when the missionaries coming over here, they're presenting these, that's just where they gravitated towards. So I don't think making those kind of observations, to me, doesn't make me racist. It, if I were to
It's
say we're better than them, absolutely that. But
but
give me your.
that's not it's not about necessarily saying that you are racist. It's about, and again, like there's also that sort of positive racism, right?
Uh-huh.
Like you're whenever you make, even if it's based, because what you're describing is your
Uh-huh.
observation, right?
Not my observations, another guy's observation.
Okay, what okay, so whatever. What This is someone's observation.
Uh-huh.
right? It's not the rule. It's not, right? This is what he saw. Just because it's just what he saw and how he interpreted. To accept what he saw and interpreted as fact, that can become problematic. That can become
Well,
problematic when you say, because I read this, because I read this one interpretation, because I read this one thing, that this is the way it is, or because I saw that, you know, um, what that eventually amounts to is tokenism, right? Where you're saying this one guy's interpretation is right. So again, racism doesn't always have to be about saying, you know, you're this, you should die, that's the end of you,
mhm.
right? What's part of that's evident in what makes it systemic, right, is the fact that we uh, will see
Excuse me.
these cultural attributes, let's call them, right, for lack of better phrase, and say, because I have seen this cultural thing, because I've observed this cultural thing, I'm going to assume that this is true, right? If there's one thing that's true about the study of history, it's that perception always matters more than reality to us as human beings,
Certainly.
right? And because when we take that perception, our own perception, and make it a generalization on entire people, whether it's positive or negative, that still falls into the category of racism, because you're assuming that your own observation is essential, and it's not about the group in that point. It's about you. It's about not you specifically, Isaiah. It's you, the individual, whoever the
Yeah.
you is, who's making the observation and saying, because I have seen this, it must be true for all South Koreans. Because I have seen this, it must be true for all Latinos. Because I have seen this, it must be true. You are essentially creating that racialization. It's not about positive or negative, right? There are a lot of positive attributes, you know, that will say, "Oh, hey, uh, I don't know, anything you just mentioned, everything you just mentioned. There's nothing inherently negative about what you were talking about. However, the way it's described is very much in a very othering sort of sentiment, where it's sort of the outsider looking in and saying, "This is what I have seen, and this is what is true." There's a difference between saying, "This is what I have seen, this is my interpretation, this is what I would like to discuss," versus
So
saying, "This is what I have seen, this is what is."
yeah, I see.
You know what I'm
I
saying?
think we have to be very. I mean, that's okay. We could agree to disagree on this point,
That's
but
fine, but, like,
um,
my point is
um, they,
it's not necessarily about the group,
yeah,
it's about the
this,
individual doing, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
No, I mean, after living here for 10 years and having seen some of the stuff, I know that his option. It's like kind of seeing someone else back
Right,
it up statistically, really
totally.
made a lot of sense to me. But the thing is, though, I will say this. So people
And
talk
also,
about,
racism in America is a much different monster.
yeah, well,
It's
there.
a much different monster.
But my opinion is that we're all racist. So there's no real way to avoid it altogether. It's like we could try to mitigate it. I mean, I'd be the first to admit that I have racist tendencies, and as the father of a half Korean, half Mexican child, I would never want my daughter to be like discriminated against here in South Korea. So it's one of those things that I have to try to live out. But I understand that I have some natural inclinations that are not at all to be colorblind. It's not at all to not show preferential treatment, and so I have to constantly keep that in check. And as a Christian, I have to be honest and recognizing that and understanding that this is maybe just a character flaw of Isaiah Perez. But rather than trying to deny it, I genuinely have to say I'm the biggest hypocrite out of anybody I know. Now,
Everybody's a hypocrite.
yeah, there might
Every,
be some bigger hypocrites out there. I'm sure there is, but I've never met them because,
every, everybody's a hypocrite.
yeah, any one of my atheist co-hosts said everybody has two sets of books in which they judge, or two sets of scales that they're one for everyone else and then one for me. So
Oh, I
uh,
100% agree with that.
yeah, so I do want to start to wrap this up, but I do want to ask you if you can tell me about um kind of like whether or not white nationalism have been emboldened because I think that January 6th riot was kind of like the culmination of the previous 5 years. Like I had been telling people that since about the year prior to Donald Trump running for president. I mean, and I'm glad I'm on record for saying all this because you could go back and look at my Facebook, and I'm like, I don't care what you agree, one side or the other. You cannot think that you can continue to dehumanize people and to talk this disrespectfully. And I don't care whatever it could be religion or it could be politics, but you cannot think that this is not going to have real life consequences. And so whenever I started to see those race riots that were breaking out, I believe after it might have been George Floyd. Yeah, I think George Floyd, whenever he was killed, and all that stuff that was going on. And of course, we had the Rittenhouse that just went down. All this stuff, I could have.
Or you can go back even further. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm sitting there and I'm like, I called this 5 years ago. Nobody listened to a damn word I had to say. So, what are your thoughts about the rising and how has it been rising more since the last 5 years?
And this is a paper I would like to write one day, and it would definitely require some outside help because it's not my expertise, or part of it isn't my expertise. But I'm convinced that the polarization of America not began, but because it's always sort of been, but was heightened after 9/11. I think it was post 9/11 that we started to become a party before country sort of people, where it started to become, if you're a Republican, Democrats are traitors to America. If you're a Democrat, Republicans are traitors to America. And we start seeing that polarization happening under Bush. It continues under Obama, and it comes to a head under Trump. All right, that's because if you're talking about white supremacy movements, I mean, there were a lot. I remember reading in 2008 that they were, because this is when I was still working in television. I was still working on this show and interviewing people about the show about prison gangs and white supremacists. There were people who came out, white supremacists who came out and voted for Obama in 2008 because they were so sure he would screw up the world that in 2012 people would come out onto their way of thinking. It didn't happen in 2012, but it sure as hell happened in 2016, right? And Southern Poverty Law Center tracked a massive, like 4, 5, 6, 700% increase in white supremacy membership, whether online or whatever, under the Obama presidency. That makes total sense, right? Because look, we have had 3 non-white Protestant presidents in America, right? JFK, look what happened to him. Barack Obama, it's a miracle nothing happened to him, and Joe Biden, it remains to be seen.
Wait, okay? You said
non-white Protestant. Non-white Protestant. JFK was Catholic, Obama's black, Joe Biden's Catholic. Everyone else is white male Protestant.
Oh, okay. WASP. They're WASP.
Yeah.
White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yeah. Everyone else is white male Protestant. Okay. So, and I'm not necessarily saying that JFK, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to ask my wife. She's more of a JFK expert than me. She thinks the mafia is responsible. But the fact is we've had 3 non-white Protestant presidents, right? And that happens after 9/11. There's been the last 20 years has been massive, massive, massive changes, you know? And I think as, you know, if we're talking broadly as human beings, when we see change, we don't usually gravitate towards it. We dig into our thing, and that's when the extremes sound more right. I mean, Jeff was even telling me that they would, get people on board their way of thinking just by latching into one thing. Like if they were anti-immigrant, they had them, right?
Right.
I mean, there was someone when I was presenting at a conference at Gonzaga a couple of years ago. There was a guy presenting with me who talked about this group in Pennsylvania called Keystone United, right? Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. They had hundreds of people. I mean, maybe over 1,000 people come out to protest immigration in Pennsylvania. The immigration was destroying Pennsylvania. I mean, look, I'm pretty sure no one's crossing the border into Pennsylvania. If they are, they're Canadians, and they're all very polite. So, I think you're safe.
Yeah.
Right? What they didn't realize is the organizing group was a group called Keystone United, which is great. Sounds great. Keystone should be united. What they didn't realize is that Keystone United previously were the KSS, the Keystone State Skinheads, one of the largest white nationalist
Oh
groups.
wow.
Yeah. And all these people were going over there and supporting and holding up slogans and signs that sound good. Like we take America First, for example. America First sounds good. Should America put its own interests first before other countries? I mean, yeah, every other country does that,
Yeah,
right? The problem is that there were a lot of people who saw the America First slogan and connected it to the people I study. I mean, there are marches. One of the largest white supremacy marches in America, 1925, the Second Klan marches on Washington, D.C. They're all holding slogans that say America First. Gerald L.K. Smith, right, who I would call the grandfather of American Nazism, starts the America First Party. America First means America for Americans. The problem is that word American has a very finite definition to them. Whereas to be an
white
American,
Americans.
white Protestant, right? That's what an American is. And there were a lot of people who saw the America First slogan. Look, I don't know whether Trump knew it or not. I don't think Trump ever reads, so I doubt he knew it, right? But he used a slogan that a lot of white supremacists were very comfortable with.
Yeah.
And
I
that
don't.
that
Sorry.
necessarily, you know, that's also could lead to because the America First Party becomes the Christian nationalist crusade. Right? And this hyper nationalism is a very big facet of white
Yeah.
supremacy movements.
And I don't think he had any original ideas because "Make
No,
America
it
Great."
was
That's
Reagan's.
he stole it from Reagan.
Oh, he
And
dropped the
actually,
let's. He dropped the let's. Reagan had let's make America great again.
MAGA.
It's totally.
That's
It's a
funny.
it's very much a Vanilla Ice Queen sort of thing.
That's funny. But I do want to say this, that the vitriol that I saw under Bill Clinton, because you traced it back to Bush, I saw things really start to go down
Oh,
under
I
Bill.
agree.
And
I
so
agree.
if you look at some of the debates, for example, and this is not hard to research yourself,
No, no, no.
just watch some of the debates that existed before that, the presidential, and you could have some really, really, really respectful dialogue. In fact, even if you listen to his father, I mean, they're having some honest disagreements, and they couldn't be any more respectful. Just as like we are here. I mean, I very strongly disagree with some of the stuff that you're saying, because I will say this. So we talk about the race card. I believe when it's necessary, we got to play the race deck. Like if something is race and what I am perceiving as racist, um, that needs to be called out. But whenever you start to nitpick any little thing, like oh my god, this kind of stuff that exists here in Korea, like they'll hire like a Chinese person to like a or Korean person will like go to China and play the role, and um, people get really upset, like, oh, she's playing like a Chinese person or something. They'll say that that's like cultural appropriation or whatever. They'll use whatever words they want to use, and I'm like, okay, if they went and they got me to go and play a Chinese person, that would be, you would understand that would be just totally off base. Um, but like, I think there's just a lot of things that get nitpicked. Even talking about, as I said, cultural appropriation. Like we got married in Korean traditional uh, gowns. You know what I mean? And I don't know, maybe someone wouldn't consider that cultural appropriation, but I think whenever you whenever you want to participate in that, like I think that's all the more, it's all the better. People want to
Right, but there's a
participate
difference
in
between
tradition.
appropriating and participating. There's a stark difference between the two.
Yeah,
There's a
but okay, I do get that. But there's a lot of nitpicking in that area as well. So it's like I'm just saying, it's like, what's the splitting hairs? There's a lot of splitting hairs and stuff, and so what can happen is, and this is what my beef is that you can really start to burn people out to where they just don't want to hear about. Like honestly, I totally can understand why Caucasian people who like aren't racist, who just your average Joe Blow family in America, why they're like, I've just heard enough, because it seems like there's certain groups of people that this is the only thing that they're talking about. and it's constantly being shoved on you, and it's constantly being you're being told is you're being told that you're the abuser here, you're the bad guy in all of this. Whenever you're just really going about your life, or maybe you are
Well,
benefiting from the system that has oppressed people. But yeah, go ahead.
it's just there's become a recognition or and a reckoning with white privilege, and that's a real facet of this country, and a lot of people take issue with recognizing that privilege,
Hmm.
and that's because those people take it as a personal affront on them when it's more of a social commentary,
Hmm.
right? Look, is it beneficial to be white in America? Yes. Is it beneficial to be white and Protestant in America? Yes. Is it beneficial to be white, Protestant, and male in America? Yeah, absolutely.
And
Those are the
straight, talk
and
about straight,
straight.
cisgendered,
Yep,
cisgendered,
straight. Yeah.
cis.
I
I
mean,
gotta throw
but
that one
the
in there as
way
well.
one of the things that I when I talk to my students, when I talk about the idea of privilege or I talk about it, right? If we look at American history, and we're just talking America here, my specialty is America. I can't really talk to other countries. I
Hmm.
can, I mean, I can give my honest opinion, but this is my expertise, right? On a scale of 1 to 100, right? White Protestant men started up here at 200, okay? As we move forward, and we get to let's say we see a couple things happening for white women in the early American period. Okay, so there's a little bit there, but when we get to the post Civil War era, we start to see a lot of more others, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
immigrants, and we start to see, okay, there's a little bit growth here, a little bit, but it doesn't really come to anything until we get to the 20th century. Okay. Then we start seeing a little bit more growth with immigration, right? But then we get to the 1920s with immigration restriction, and we get the Klan, and then we get the Depression, and then it really starts to move after the 1950s. Now, it's from the Brown versus Board of Education, I would argue, through the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement, and there's Latino rights movements, and there's, gay, Jewish, whatever movements, right? As we see when we get to the 20th century, that group starts to get up to about 50. What changes in the 20th century, 21st century, is two things. One, all of those others start to get a little bit more. So they're up here on a scale of 1 to 100. They're up here at about 70, sitting here at 70. But
Hmm.
what we've seen in the last 20 years is this 200 has been brought down to 150. Is it still more advantageous in this country to be white, male, and Protestant? Yes. Also, has there been a sense of loss, a sense of power loss, a sense of uh, a victimization of blame on those white people? Yes, that is also true. However, that power that is lost still isn't leveling the playing field. It still puts them above, but that sense
Right.
of loss that you're describing is still real. And
Yeah.
that's why I would argue, especially in the last 20 years, we've seen a rise of this stuff, or people more likely to uh, entertain the ideas of extremists because there is
That's
this power loss, because there is
that
this
is
sense,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
There is this
It's
sense. Is it a
it's
true loss of power? Yes, but is it loss of power that makes
it's gonna
them
hurt you.
beneath the other? No, they're still
Yeah.
well above. Like I
Well,
get I get to have white privilege until someone finds out I'm Jewish. Then it goes away. No, it's
ouch. Then
I've
it's like,
I've watched it happen. I've
yeah,
watched
yeah,
it
no, I
happen
get it. I
before my
right in
face.
front of you. So, what's interesting. That is an interesting. That's fascinating what you were just talking about right now. But so, have you read *The Grapes of Wrath* by John
A
Steinbeck?
long time ago.
So, my hometown is actually the historical backdrop of that. And so, when the people from Oklahoma came to where we live now, they were treated very bad, just as you would treat any other minority or you know minority or woman 100 years ago. These people who were, I mean, we might call them country bumpkins. There's another word people use that refers to them as garbage. I find it. We'll never use that word, but So they come here and they're put actually into some kind of internment camps, and they're on the outskirts of my hometown. So my best friend is actually, his mom is actually from Oklahoma, so her family came over, and these people are like, they're poor like me growing up, and so for them, when they hear a word like white privilege, they get totally disgusted because like we don't, they're like, we don't have anything more than anyone else. We
because
I've had to
they see
hold
privilege
on.
as monetary.
Let me finish. What Yeah, you can come in afterwards, but what he doesn't what they don't really understand is that it's not saying that if you have white privilege your life is going to be a bed of roses, because nobody's life is a bed of roses as it is. But there are certain things like the benefit of just looking onto your currency, for example, and just seeing nothing but white people on there, or looking into the Senate and seeing 90 something odd percent of them being Caucasian. And or just take this as an example. I mean, this is such a grotesque example to use, and I hate using an example like this, but this is just classic. But Jeffrey Dahmer had abducted a 14-year-old Laotian uh, immigrant kid by the name of Conrad Smithsonison, and dude actually raped this 14-year-old kid and drilled a hole into his head, actually, and then he went out to get something to drink, and the kid was able to stumble around and make his way down to escape. Jeffrey Dahmer comes up and the people call the police, and you can listen to the conversation because a black woman called and um, reported this kid who was trying to get away. And so Jeffrey Dahmer walks up, got this naked, bleeding kid, 14-year-old kid, with the hole in his head, and is actually also bleeding from his butt because he raped him as well. And that kid got released to Jeffrey Dahmer, and as soon as Jeffrey Dahmer got home, he went and killed the boy. Now ask yourself, if you reverse those roles, can you imagine any scenario in which an Asian man gets caught with a 14-year-old kid, and they don't even do the kind of due diligence to check IDs or check, you know, it just, those kind of things
Mind
where
blowing.
you're, what was that?
It's mind blowing.
It is mind blowing. And I hate to use such a graphic example, but there's so many things that you could say like that. And so it's not a matter of, it doesn't mean white privilege. You're born white and your life is just, you're
No,
just going to
it's
be
nothing
given
because
everything.
yeah, because people associate privilege with monetary, and
Yeah.
that's not what it means. That's not even remotely what it means. You know.
Um, just last thoughts. I'd like to close off now, but last thoughts. If you have any ideas about the future, where we go from here, because some of this stuff's very negative that we've been talking about, but
Yeah, I
where to go
mean,
from here? How do we fight the extremism, or et cetera, et cetera?
and this is not meant to sound self-promoting at all,
Uh
but
huh.
it's education. You know, education is, we're also living in a time right now where in this country there's becoming a massive attack on education and a de-emphasis on
Right.
education, right? Which is unfortunate because the only way, I mean, look, there's two ways I think. Um, all right, to me, part of the issue with me, what I took with the Make America Great Again,
Hmm.
right? Um, were two things. One, it was, when are you talking about? We're talking about again? I mean, first of all, you got to give me this. It's like, when are we talking about when again?
Yeah.
When were
When
we
was
great?
it? Yeah.
What? All right, because every time they're talking about it, they're talking about usually decades that are like great for a certain demographic, but really
Right. Right.
horrible for everyone else. The second thing is I truly believe this country is great because America is one of the few countries where we actually can make positive social change. We really can, and we make big steps forward that are like cemented and cannot be undone. We'll try to pick at them. We'll try to knock them down. But what makes this country great, and what will always make this country great, is the possibility for change. Right? There are
Hmm.
a lot of countries, you know as well as I do. You've traveled as much. You've lived more places than I have, but I've traveled and I've been,
Hmm.
right.
Sure.
We both come from, multinational families, immigrant families. There are a lot of countries in this world where change is not possible. It's just not. Um, so to me, the only way, look, you're never going to eradicate this stuff, because as long as people have emotions, racism is going to be a thing. But if you can educate people and you can embrace different cultures, or teach that different cultures are not things to be feared, but to be understood, uh, celebrated, embraced, studied, right? That's the only path forward.
Yeah.
And that to me is, again, not meant to sound self-serving as an educator, but
No, that's great.
that's really the only, to me, that's the only way to move forward, to progress further, is more emphasis on education. And I'm not just talking about looking at it through one lens. I'm talking about um, looking at common stories through different lenses. Like one of my lectures I give on the American Revolution, I talk about Native Americans of the Revolution the entire time, and most students have no idea about what the role Native Americans played or how the Revolution affected Native Americans. And it's that type of taking accepted narratives and spinning them on their heads and looking at them from different takes. That's the stuff that helps us progress further, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We support 5 different charities here. So the guests who come on, we make a donation for them. So we do um, unwed mothers here in South Korea, Beyond Barriers. Actually, that's one of them. Because actually, I've gotten, speaking of like what we do, is to do something. Um, so do the good that's in front of you. Give a hand. I'm helping out some logistically with them, and also financially supporting. So there's that. There's a Jewish and Palestinian peace organization in Israel. I actually got to go into the home of reformed terrorists who work with parents of slain civilians, and they're working together for peace. So that's another one we're doing. And then with the North Korean organization here in South Korea. So, well, which one of those sounds the most interesting to you?
I'll Beyond Barriers.
Beyond Barriers?
Yeah, I'll support that.
Yeah, Robin stepped their game up a little bit in some of their social stuff. So, I mean, that's just the thing I will say. Um, I think if you're just honest with ourselves about the kind of uh, stereotypes, prejudices, race, in fact, even racism that we all have, because trying to say that I don't have any or I'm not a hypocrite, um, we got to start first and foremost with the man in the mirror. Michael Jackson's song, just talking
Mhm.
about I'm starting with the man in the mirror, because we can always say that person needs to change, the Jew needs to change, the KKK, the white person, the Black Panther, everyone else needs to change, but I'm fine to stay the same. I think when you really start to understand that societies are made up of a collection of individual people, how we're voting daily, what we're posting online, what we're buying, these all contribute to the overall, you know, culture and nature of the society you're living in. I mean, I can tell you this, I would say I am far more patriotic than your average American, but for completely different reasons, because I've actually been in North Korea and I've actually seen people oppressed. So in America, I may say America, maybe we go overboard in some ways with the freedom. I'll be the first to admit that, and I'll be the first to call out the stuff that are wrong in the past, was messed up in the past, and are continually wrong now. But if you loved a person who had some kind of addiction, something that was going wrong with them, whatever it might be, whether it's alcoholism or whatever it might be, and you didn't try to address that problem, you didn't try to give him help, that's not being a very loving person. Obviously they have to want to change, and you can't force someone to change, but to say that I'm only going to be loving if I go along with everything that you present to me, that's just not accurate. So a lot of people do hear some of the stuff I say, and they say that I'm un-American or unpatriotic, but I'm like, having lived overseas for 10 years, that has turned me into like Captain America. Seeing some of the other places that, some of the other places like in Haiti, but the government just doesn't care to help out the people. Like America, for the thousand things I could say wrong about it, it has afforded me the ability to get educated and
Hmm.
to even criticize a lot of these things. I've gotten to
It's the
be
most
able to,
patriotic thing to do in America, I think, is to be able to
yeah,
criticize. Yeah. But
yeah, so
patriotism, again, is one of those social constructs,
yeah.
you
Well,
know?
you know what? We definitely have to have a round two because
Yeah, for sure, man.
I'll have my host. You're a very intelligent person.
Oh, thank you.
There's a little bit. Um, I just the last thing I want to say is, yeah, I think the racism issue definitely needs to be taken seriously, but
Yeah,
we'll have to maybe iron out some stuff a little. We'll have to maybe put in a little bit of kinks, iron
sure.
some stuff out because it just as far as approach, having done the research and that I've done, it's like I definitely think that people are getting a bit overboard in what they think racism is, and whenever you do that, it's
Again,
going to
that's
have the opposite effect. It's going to have the opposite effect to where you're just going to turn people off, and then people are going to be like, I just don't want to hear about it anymore, and that's where I think the problem is. But
yeah,
that being
and
said,
and that's the whole thing about constructs, man,
yeah,
because that's the whole problem is that because they are so infinitely redefinable.
yeah. Uh, but that being said, I really want to thank you for your time. Do you have
Hey,
any websites or books, or social media, anything like that
uh,
you can tell us about?
no, there's just projects I'm working on. Working on publishing a book, working on
Yeah.
articles. Nothing concrete
Another
yet.
publisher. I'm actually working on a book right now about race and racism called
Very
Why
cool.
Race Matters.
Oh,
Or
very cool.
Why Race Doesn't. Maybe no, maybe it's called Why Race Doesn't Matter. I'm saying Why Race Matters, but it's just the no
Title is a
Why
work in
Race Matters.
progress.
No, no, no,
Title
no,
is a
no,
work in
no, no.
progress.
The title is Why Race Matters, but the first line is Race Doesn't Matter.
Yeah,
And then yeah, it's interesting though. I'm about maybe like 4 or 5 chapters in, so
very
it'll be
cool.
my third book, and yeah, I'll have to put it on my link tree whenever I get that done. But that being said, I want to thank you for joining me today. Be sure to visit our website at www.rgpodcast.com. Check us out at Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, just about everywhere you can find someone, you can find us. If you'd like to come on as a guest, we're just having conversations with the average Joe Blow people. You don't have to have huge education or credentials. We just love having talks, respectful as always. And you can email us at ragpodcast@gmail.com. We want to end off with this video, and we definitely look forward to seeing you back again.
Thank you. Thank you for
Here
having me.
we go. Here we go.